We'll wait for a minute or two before starting, let more people join in. Okay, thank you for joining everyone. I think we'll start the session. Uh, yes, thank you Sanket, Shravan, Mathew for joining us and participating in this session. Today's session is going to be about DPDP insights and how data consent and compliance works in financial services. We have our speakers with us, Sanket Nayak from Digio. Sanket is co-founder at Digio, where he leads the product strategy and growth for digital infrastructure solutions serving the BFSI ecosystem. He also has prior experience as Twitter. We have Shravan Koti with us, who is the Chief Information Security Officer at Zerodha, leading the firm's information security function with a focus on AI-driven cybersecurity and intrusion detection systems. Mathew, the session will be moderated by Mathew Chacko, who is a founding partner at Spice Route Legal, one of India's leading TMT and data protection lawyers, advising major tech, telecom, financial services, healthcare, and startup companies. Thank you guys for joining us and agreeing to conducting this session.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining in on for a post-lunch session. I hope all of you have not had a very large lunch and are not sleeping behind your screens. But we hope this will be a rather productive discussion. We've brought together two of India's leading thinkers around tech and data protection. I'm not going to reintroduce them, but I'm guessing that neither Shravan nor Sanket require an introduction to this audience. They obviously bring diverging perspectives to this discussion. Sanket brings in his entrepreneurial hat, his product hat, plus questions around how can he solve some of the pain around the DPDPA. And Shravan is potential customer, regulated very closely by one of India's leading financial services regulators, is obviously looking at this entire act, both from a, hey, this is exciting, I'm sure, because it changes how data is used in India, but also from a, how do I comply with this law without changing how we do business in India. So we've got both of these perspectives. Before we start, let me very quickly give a small lawyer's perspective on why this law is impactful, large, potentially life-changing for companies within financial services. So I've been doing this for a fairly long time, and in 2016, and in multiple cycles, right? We had the GDPR cycle, we had some of the other laws having PIPL cycle, and now we've got Indian law coming up. And I was sitting with a chief data protection officer at one of India's largest financial services entities in 2016. And I was kind of explaining why and how the GDPR will change things for how they do business in Europe. And the long explanation, gave a presentation, obviously, it was 1 hour long. At the end of it, the chief data protection officer turns around to me and says, "This is not fair because you are forcing me to do all these things on my data." The underlying thought process there was the idea that financial service, financial services entities, customers' data was their own data. Right? I argued unsuccessfully that it wasn't, that the legal framework is that the data is owned by the customer, not by a financial services entity. But the gentleman was hurt, adamant, sure that ये मेरा data है, right? It's not anybody else's. Now, that debate has been revisited in India when the account aggregator framework came up, has now being revisited with the DPDPA, where companies are saying, hey, this is my data. Why are you making rules for how I treat my data? It's very, very clear. The law is clear now. Case law is clear. Judgment's clear. The ministry is clear. Soon the data protection board will be clear that the data that you have of your customers and your employees are not yours. They are owned by what I'd encourage you to call a data subject, right? I prefer that word to others, but to the person whose data it is being leased to each of your entities for a specific purpose. And what this law says is that if you want to use the data for a purpose, take the subject's permission and use it only for the purposes in which that subject allows you to do it. And when he tells you to get out of his property, you need to get out of his property or her property. So that's the logic, and that changes everything. And it changes everything at a time when data is at the heart of how you do business in India, particularly in the digital domain, but not just. And Shravan will obviously explain how that is impactful. But before we go to Shravan, one of this age-old things that are thrown to me when I talk to clients is, this is so painful. So let me ask Sanket, don't wear your product hat, wear your entrepreneur, business owner hat. Is the DPDPA a pain, like a lot of my clients think? Or is it an opportunity to do something different, better, maybe differentiate yourself from your competitor? How do you see it, Sanket?
Thanks, Mathew. And this answer changes basically from whom you are talking to, right? Let's first talk about the people who are concerned here, that is the users, the data subjects, right? And like everything, the demography is changing, right? Our generation maybe was not so much finicky about, my data lying here, there, the photocopies, standard, you know, data pilferage that was happening at various levels. The new generation is actually finicky and concerned about where the data is going. And this is a reality. The sooner the industry acknowledges it, the better it is. It is like 10 years back, going digital was a choice. 2016, when we started Digio, going digital was a choice. And we all saw what happened. Now, going digital is a must have. Same thing is coming with data privacy. Offering data privacy or safeguards, having guardrails is not a choice anymore. It is imperative, A, legally, and B, if you want to sustain in a business which is targeting consumers. Second, if you talk to businesses who deal with data subjects day in, day out, everyone has that nuanced view that my house is clean, everything is fine when my business is concerned. But I am concerned about data privacy when I'm, signing up a vendor, data security and data privacy vendor, third party, so on and so forth. The reality is your own house is also not clean. So the best practices that a business expects from a particular third party or a vendor, it should also be followed not only in letter but also in spirit when it comes to their own business, keeping the business money thing aside, what is right for the data subject. So that's what I have observed when talking to at least 100 plus customers now, specifically on DPDP. Mathew, you are on mute.
Sorry, on a lighter note, Sanket, I must tell you that 15 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago, Shravan was telling me that his house is clean. But anyway.
Yeah, I just remembered that, yes.
But very quickly, so that's a great segue to what I think would be a great way for Shravan to come in. And everyone, by way of introduction, Shravan is the CISO at Zerodha. And Shravan, therefore, is clearly grappling with this rather monumental change on a day-to-day basis. But before we go into the changes, Shravan, let me ask you, how do you marry data protection / privacy concerns and changes? Sanket's kind of aspirational, do what is good for your data subject and customers line, with the actual costs associated with the change and the conflicting demands of running a business without making earth-shattering changes every year, right? How do you marry that? Is it and how do you think of it personally? Do you agree with Sanket, this is something that we all should do because it's good for the data subject, or do you think from a more practical perspective incremental changes are a better way to go with it?
Yeah, I actually kind of completely agree with Sanket here, and I do stand by my stance that my house is clean. The reason I'll come to the reason. So, thankfully, the way Zerodha has been designed is like a privacy-first organization. So we can proudly say that Kite app has zero permissions. So Kite app basically doesn't ask you any sort of permissions. If you check our web application, it has zero trackers basically, right? So what Nitin believes in is largely that don't onto others what you don't want someone else to do to you. So basically we from the beginning culturally have never sent push notifications, never asked anybody to trade, etc., right? So that culture is baked in, and add to that we have Kailash. So Kailash is our CTO, and he's a he always thinks about data privacy and data security. That has been baked in from the very beginning, so that makes my life very much easy, given that both the CEO and CTO are aligned, right? So what we've kind of consciously done from the beginning is, even though like data security or data privacy act wasn't in vogue, we have taken consents from the very beginning. So we have taken customers' consent and we have respected that consent. So I get the fact that it is very tough for a business when they are scaling to do all of this consciously, because growth at any cost is what we have seen people do in the past few years. But thankfully, we have been at the right place at the right time. Maybe we never had to do all of this for customer acquisitions. So we have consciously stayed like have the data principles priorities at the beginning. So we have ensured that we don't really do anything that will need a major change when a data privacy act of sorts comes into picture. Having said that, there are certain things that we'll also have to change. So that is something that we have started doing as soon as the rules came into picture. One major thing is the penalties that come with the Data Protection Act, right? So the penalties are huge. So just to say, it ranges from 0 to 200 crores, right? So yeah, you may have your house clean, so that doesn't really necessitate a fact that you will never be in a position where the data is leaked, where a customer's data is leaked, right? So that is a situation we all don't want to be in, but it is a reality that it can happen any day. So what you do in such a scenario is where you curtail that risk. So what we personally did is we bought a cyber insurance. Even though there was no regulatory mandate for us to get a cyber insurance, we got a significant sum coverage as soon as the DPDP Act came into vogue. So what I would like think as a business that is building today is to have these principles as the first principles, if possible, and also cover your risks given that the DPDP Act is live today. Matthew, you are again on mute.
Perfect. Absolutely interesting and amazing to see that you and Sanket agree on this. So let me dig a little deeper into this, right? Now, when the act was originally drafted, we had a lot of clauses which imposed these two slightly technical but also legal terms called privacy by design and privacy by default. It's not there in the present act, but was there in the original draft that came out. Now, there was a reason why the government thought if we remove those two principles, it's going to become easier for people to run digital businesses, or not just, but most of these online data collection processes will become easier, is what the government, I think, thought. Now, I, as a lawyer, will argue that the spirit of privacy by design and privacy by default is already there in the statute, and all right thinking companies would have to implement it. But for me, that's a very selfish perspective, because then all of your companies have to come to me and ask me, Matthew, what is privacy by design? What is privacy by default? And I make some money out of it. So I am biased. So let's keep my opinion apart. Shravan, why don't you start and tell us, do you think privacy by design and privacy by default, um, can you see ghosts of those two concepts in the law? Do you think eventually the Data Protection Board will say you have to comply with by design and by privacy by design and by default? Or do you think there is a meaningful lessening of the threshold for you?
So I had been in consultations with the MIT secretary while the rules were being framed, right? So at that point of time, there were a lot of, as you are aware, maybe a lot of firms in India were not really comfortable with those two clauses being in the act, etc. So, but having said that, India was growing, and India was growing at a huge pace since 2016. So maybe the government kind of felt that these particular principles, even though they would be a hindrance to an organization while growing, but they have baked this into the spirit of the law, right? So I, as you rightly said, even though they have been omitted in the wording of the law, but I don't think the spirit goes away. So any business that is building today, while they might think that this is not laid down clearly, data design designing by principle by privacy is not there in the law, they shouldn't really. Someone says no voice. You're able to
I
hear
can
me, right?
I can hear you, Shravan.
I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, design has, like, someone who's designing a business today has to think about privacy, because as I said, the fines are humongous. So when it comes to defending yourself when faced with such a challenge, where the deep data protection board is trying to find whether you have done everything in your capacity to ensure that that data was protected, if you've kind of taken a line that no, this is not uh, in the spirit of the law, so I won't do the design as per the privacy principles, then defending that at that point of time will become very difficult. So I would say that uh, even though they removed those two clauses, but the penalties that they put in have kind of covered for that.
Perfect. And that's we agree, absolutely, right? Sanket, your thoughts on this?
So I think by removing, and my assessment of things has been, the two principles have been removed in letter, not in spirit. By removing it in letter, the government has allowed businesses, because the law has come in now, but businesses have been doing or conducting the business the way they have been for ages now, right? So privacy cannot be an afterthought. Now, putting those two clauses in letter means businesses have to change overnight. However, by removing that and ensuring businesses or pushing businesses to abide by the principles in totality is something that the government is trying to do. They're not saying it is being lenient, but they have just removed those legal principles from the law. However, any business that is starting now, they have to bake in privacy right at design stage, exactly like how security in financial services or fintech, security cannot be an afterthought, compliance cannot be an afterthought. Similarly, data privacy cannot be an afterthought for any business which is getting built now. However, all the businesses that have been operational for long time, this provides them with a window to change their practices.
Interesting. So again, agreement between the two regulated entities. So I think we should have had one unregulated entity ka representative here as well, so that we could see the counterpoint. But on that note, and your security point, Sanket, extremely interesting. Let's put it again to Shravan. You are obviously under the knife when it comes to SEBI's cybersecurity diktats. And I'm presuming, and Sanket is under, and his company is under the RBI's diktats. We know there are contradictions, but let's assume for now that the two are in harmony. One, how does the DPDPA change what you do? Right? And two, how does the DPDPA change what you do in respect of your partnerships with unregulated fintechs? Because obviously, outsourcing, its equivalent, resilience, BCP, all of those were already existing in the law and baked in previously. What does this change now in terms of all of that?
So as you rightly said, it was already there in sectoral regulations, right? Every sectoral regulator had cybersecurity principles for a long time now. So SEBI came up with this regulation back in 2018, and Kailash was a part of that committee that drafted the regulation. So the 2024 regulation is a revised version of the 2018 cybersecurity regulations. And I was involved in the consultations, etc., during the 2024 regulation. Right? So the regulations have been put out, and it is for the entities to comply with that. Thankfully, our regulators have extensively thought and put out the exact guardrails that needs to be there. RBI goes a step ahead and mandates each and everything, including SIM binding, etc., which we don't agree to, because it's
Sorry, let me stop you there, Shravan. Is Zerodha regulated by the RBI as well, or are
No,
you primarily regulated
we
by
are a
SEBI?
SEBI regulated entity, but we do have a NBFC called
Yeah.
Zerodha Capital.
Of
So
course, yes.
they are regulated by RBI.
ठीक है.
So SIM binding, we have vehemently objected because of it is against privacy. So it basically needs SMS permission, etc. Right? So so basically, having these cybersecurity regulations in place definitely helps us when complying with the DPDP Act, because the security sections of the DPDP Act we have already been compliant with. So you don't need to do anything additional there to ensure that you are complying there. So that is a benefit for us, but for an unregulated entity, it is going to be tough. So they'll have, if they haven't thought about security from the very beginning. The things that change for us is that two things. Mainly, we'll have to work with a consent manager And since the consent manager piece has to be a third party entity, you will have to partner with someone and work with a consent manager to ensure that consents are given and taken by the data principal. The second change is you have to ensure that with all your vendors, your agreements, etc., will have to change. They'll have to include the DPDP coverage, right? That is an exercise that we have been doing for a while now. So thankfully, we don't have a lot of external entities to whom data flows out. So that is again thanks to Kailash, etc. So what we have done is, to quote an example, say if I have a voice telephony software, so I have two options. One is to send the phone number to that application and get the call routed. Other is to build the integration wherein you are not exposing the phone number, but you are triggering the phone call from your app. So we have gone the second way. So wherever possible, we have ensured that the data doesn't flow to the third party entities. So that's making our compliance journey a little easier. But having said that, if an entity has a lot of partners, a lot of third party entities, it's going to be a nightmare. Uh, Thankfully, time has been given by the government of India, but I am really not sure whether every entity will be able to comply within those timelines, and there will be a need for extension, according to me.
Yeah, not the first person to bring that up. Sanket,
Yeah.
what about you?
So, so we became a regulated entity sometime in starting 2024, right, in Jan 2024. But since 2016, we have been working with entities who are regulated either by SEBI or by RBI or by IRDI or by TRI, right? So, sort of, we were molded that way, that any regulation that applies to our customers has somehow trickled down and affected us as well, and the way we operate and the practices that we follow. Because all the customers are large enterprises, they have their own compliances to take care of. They pass on a lot of compliances because we are vendor partners to them, and we go through a lot of rigorous audits. Every month there is some audit that is going on. Now, post becoming RBI regulated entity ourselves, the audits have just increased. Yeah. But what it ensures is, we are always on top of guidelines, regulations that come from any regulator. Even though we might have missed something, the customer will say that, this new guideline has come up. What are you doing about it? Right. So, being on top of guidelines, so that helps us being prepared. And when you are a regulated entity or have been working with regulated entity, mostly your house has been in some shape and form, like in order for a lot of things. Again, we the Zerodha team, we believe in literal zero outsourcing policy. Except for very few essential services, we do not outsource anything, right? So
And yet you're encouraging your customers to outsource some parts of their data compliance to you, correct?
we have been in that business. Yeah. So
Go on, please.
yeah. So definitely, when the footprint is minimized, it helps. However, that does not absolve us from doing the work that we need to do for in our own organization to be completely DPDP compliant, both in letter and in spirit. How it is different for Zerodha versus us is, Zerodha is a data fiduciary and we are a data processor. So that's how it is different.
But your regulated entities will still be a data fiduciary, right?
Right. But the payment aggregator business, right? I mean, it's a B2B sort of offering. we are a data fiduciary there, but in totality. So we are one of those unique entities probably, which is a data fiduciary in a small part, a data processor,
In a
large
large
part,
part.
and we have CoTrust, which we built a product to solve our own problems first. How does CoTrust help Digio to become DPDPA compliant and do all the things that are necessary, groundwork, be it data discovery, classification, lineage, monitoring, egress, ingress monitoring, all those things, consent lifecycle management. So once we were confident that the solution that we have built is helping Digio as a parent company take care of the DPDPA compliance, we extended it to the industry, saying that, okay, now we are reasonably convinced that the solution works. Let's take it to market. So that's how we have looked at things.
Perfect. Interesting. Let me ask you one question, and if you don't want to answer, I will entirely understand. How much easier is it for DGO's partners to their regulated businesses to deal with DGO's data and cybersecurity requirements than it is for your partner regulated entities where you are acting as the outsourced entity to do some work? Or is it the same? How you treat your outsourced vendors, is it different from how the large banks you partner with, they treat you?
It is the same because the guidelines are the same. It is applicable to everyone. However, banks have a lot of very stringent processes, because it also comes down to what is the scale of outsourcing. Right now, someone could have outsourced a really core operation, and there the controls need to be really tightened. However, when we outsource, like say for example, as Shravan rightly said, the example of sending or using cloud telephony services, right? So that's the extent of outsourcing, or probably using AWS India as a cloud service partner, right? It's not like we outsource anything core. So for us, it has been reasonably simpler handling third-party, sort of compliances for that third parties or vendors need to adhere to. But the work that we had to do in our own company has been humongous, and we have been on that near 10-month journey now.
Perfect. Okay, so interesting perspective, and just one more question, Sanket. Then on that question, have you already started seeing DPDPA inspired documentation from your regulated entity partners, or are you still seeing the old solely outsourcing inspired documentation?
No, we have started seeing the changes.
And is it easy to, does it all make sense, or is there nonsense flowing in as well?
No. Mostly makes sense. People are keeping it flexible, fungible, essentially. The reason is there is still some 10-15% clarity yet to emerge. But having said that, people have to start the work, right? And that's why the contracts have been kept fungible, and DPDPA coverage is a must. So all the renewals, everything that we are seeing has the DPDPA flavor to it. And
Okay, perfect.
the reality now.
Yeah, perfect. That's good to know. So everyone, according to
I
Sanket,
received an agreement from Zerodha a few days back. With DPDP flavor.
There has been a lot
if
of back and forth. I have been following up with my legal to close it soon.
if you have any negotiation salvos that you want to fire now, please, feel free. We'll all enjoy watching on the sidelines.
Mathew will earn from both of us.
Okay, let's move on from outsourcing. Let's go to the mother of the problem, or the root of the law, consent. What do we think about consent? Now, notably, the law does not have practical grounds of processing like they do in other countries. For example, legitimate interest does not have an equivalent here. Contractual necessity does not have an equivalent here. Legal compliance does not have an equivalent here. So, in the words of a very famous international lawyer who was looking at the Indian law, he said that according to the Indian law, before I kill you, I'll have to take permission to kill you, and then only I can kill you, right? But on a lighter note, but what do the two of you think? Could this have been made easier to comply with some of the other international experiences? Or do you think this is fine as it stands? And two, if you think it could have been easier with international compliances, are we expecting the DP board to kind of relax the consent heavy nature of the law? Right? And I can give you this example. When I was doing GDPR compliance in 2017 and 2018, I was working with some European lawyers and asked them, what is going to happen? And they said 90% of data processing under the GDPR will be under consent. And about roughly 8 to 10% will be under legitimate interest, and everything else will be negligible. Statistics now close to 80% is under legitimate interest. Consent operates in single digits in terms of percentages. We as a country have decided to go another way. Does it make sense? Do you think that will change? Either of you, who wants to go first? It's a slightly tricky point here. Go on, yeah.
So I think we have to give time for the law to evolve, right? So what our government has done, as you said, is that they've gone on a consent heavy route. Maybe that they thought that will work. Maybe it will work, right? We never know. So India is very different from any other country out there, right? So we'll have to wait it out. We'll have to find how things evolve. Having said that, a lot of consent can lead to banner blindness. So we have been like talking to SEBI about a lot of banners, nudges that regulators have been mandating. We have never really said no to putting these banners. We have never really said no to nudges because we were one of the first ones to come up with a nudge framework. So the people need nudges, and people need to know their rights and give the consent at the right times. But it shouldn't be so that they'll dismiss it without even reading it. So the consent has to be intelligently shown and made to understand to the customer in that small time frame. So we'll have to see how it evolves. So but I would say as like the number of consents have to like not be a really large sort of a number, and it should be something that the user can clearly understand and is consenting to.
Yeah. So at some stage, Sanket and Shravan, we should do another webinar on how to avoid consent fatigue.
Yeah.
Because that is a UI UX issue, which is going to be if you can solve that, you can solve everything else. Right. But Sanket, your thoughts?
Yeah.
Because obviously in consent, you have seen an opportunity as well. But first, let's talk about whether you see that, how you see that going forward practically.
No, I don't think the law. Okay, the law is consent centric, and I don't think it negates or deprioritizes the legitimate interests or legal basis of the data being captured, because it differs from business to business, right? And especially in the BFSI or regulated scheme of things, a lot of things are driven by regulations also, right, or guidelines. So the reason why the law is more skewed towards consent and appears to be is because the first principle of purpose has been applied, and that's a good way of looking at it, because everything has to be purpose driven. A consent, plain vanilla consent without any clear purpose or umbrella consent does not make sense. However, there should not be an overage of consents. I think
But Sanket, let me stop you here.
Sure.
It's easy for you to say because you run a B2B business.
Yeah.
Right? Let's assume you were running Zerodha. Right? It is an online B2C business.
Correct.
How many and I'll come to Shravan with the same question, but how many consents will you end up taking? And how will you make sure that by the time I give my 50th consent, I'm not so bored that I'll say I'll go back to paper brokerages, forget the convenience of digital brokerages, because this consent is making it impossible to do business.
I think it's about,
how do you?
Yeah, it's about maintaining a fine balance. So if you deconstruct everything, or rather design your consents applying the purpose lens, and let's forget the law for a minute. Let's purely put the user or the data subject at the center of the universe and saying that, okay, I need XYZ details from this particular data subject to be able to service him or her. Other than if I'm not collecting this basic information, I won't be able to service. Second is, for continuity, I need these two things, and these are the details that, as part of my obligation for upstream or downstream reporting, I will have to share with external entities. For example, a broking entity has to submit the data to a KRA. NBFC has to upload the data to CKYC and send data to credit bureaus, right? So as long as this necessary purposes are captured and articulated in a language and in a visual manner that is comprehensible by the user, it becomes a simpler design, as opposed to breaking it down into finer parts that every screen has a consent or every click of a button has a consent. Right?
Okay, understood. Perfect. So before we go on, let me give the audience context, right? Sanket's company Digio has a product called CoTrust, right? Basically, they simplify consent and they, including organization of consent, identifying where all there is personal information, putting it in a form that makes sense, and then managing it going forward. So basically making people like me largely irrelevant, but okay, I'll bear that. And a potential client for Sanket's CoTrust platform is Shravan Zerodha. So let me ask Shravan at this point, what do you think of Sanket's CoTrust and other companies like that? Are they practically useful, or is this just, are they just selling hype at this point?
Okay. So
Open invitation to bitch.
no. So basically, the second aspect which you said, they are a hype. I don't. I'll have to disagree respectfully there, because yeah, Digio has done a wonderful job on their CoTrust product. So I've seen it at the very beginning, and I've given a couple of inputs starting off, but I haven't seen the latest version of the product.
Yeah.
And so they'll again. So this is a question I had asked the MATI secretary: will the business entity be allowed to build their own consent manager framework? So the answer was very clear, that it has to be a third party entity, and a third party entity only will have to have this consent manager license, right? So you will have to work with Digio or any other consent managers that are building for out there. So they are not a hype, they are a necessity today for any organization out there. And thankfully, like, the data principal also will have all the consents at a single place. His headache is lesser. He'll have all clarity as to when he wants to revoke consent, etc. So I don't think it'll be a bad thing. So I am pretty sure CoTrust is going to be a great product.
So Sanket, they are 5% sales commission. Huh? No, but from your perspective, and no, jokes apart.
Yeah.
From your perspective, and not just about CoTrust,
No.
what
So
is it that consent managers do,
yeah.
and why is it important for all of our audience to think about engaging you or your competitors in a product of this sort, and what should they look at when evaluating these multiple products?
Right. Anyway, and I won't keep it restricted to the consent manager, because consent manager is the end product. There is a lot of homework that goes into getting to that stage, which is fundamentally, and every organization. So here the forum is primarily BFSI, but every organization has a different maturity, is at a different maturity, right? There are non-regulated entities in various industries who take information security, data security very seriously, and then there are, fintechs which are not directly regulated. For them, data security might have been a tick mark exercise. So that's why we created a tiered solution. We said that, okay, first of all, there is no solution that, it's not like one solution fits all sort of way. Every organization will have their own set of requirements. For example, a team like Zerodha, which has been, baked privacy by design, has very strong infosec culture, probably does not need a lot of modules from us. They only require a consent manager. However, if I'm going to a fintech or a smaller NBFC, there are so many NBFCs, right? Or a smaller insurance company, a smaller broker, they might not even have basic, DSPM solution at their end, right? So that's where we have built, a DSPM solution which helps you discover not only PII, also sensitive personal information. Visually provides it in two views. One is a data asset view, that this is how the data is captured, this is how it is flowing, this is how it is stored, these are the various internal services that are consuming that data, these are the various external services to which this data is going. So that's more of a a database view. And then there is a DPO view, or privacy lens, that this is the purpose for which this data was collected, and this is how this data is flowing, and these are the various teams, because purpose downstream also fits into teams like marketing, sales, product, engineering, compliance, support, so on and so forth. So those two views are available, which makes it crystal clear. So that is one module. Second comes your, how do you design the consents, the privacy center, all those things. That is more of a, and do the consent life cycle management. There we have taken learnings from our account aggregator architecture, because end of the day, a consent manager is nothing but a place where a data subject or a user can seamlessly manage his consent, give consent, provide consent, modify, revoke. And the third module is around workflows, audits, incident reporting, risk management, all those things. So depending on what is the need of the organization, either it is available as an end-to-end solution, or they can pick and choose and use the part that is they require. But consent manager is the output that becomes the that's the requirement of the law. Having said that, to get to that, you need to do a lot of homework.
So in other words, you provide the technology rails by which
Yeah.
companies can at least take the first baby steps to compliance under the DPDP.
Absolutely.
Correct. Perfect. We're running out of time, so I'm going to quickly jump a few questions. And Shravan, I'm going to ask you something that is controversial, globally controversial, but has a global answer, but the Indian answer becomes a little murky from my perspective. How do you deal with cookies? Right. So globally, when we deal with cookies, we talk about essential cookies and non-essential cookies. It's a GDPR construct that's been globally accepted. Indian law says you have to take consent before you do anything, any processing. So any collection of data from any cookie, essential or non, technically under DPDP, you can't do before compliance, before taking consent. Right now, I have a practical steer on this, but I'll come to it after you and Sanket air your visions. But how do you see cookies crumbling under the new regime? Are we going to do essential cookies? What is the regulatory logic for that? Or are you going to try and take a consent banner before even essential cookies? How do you do that from a technology perspective?
Yeah, so we are still discussing this internally. So I don't have a right answer here. But at the same time, essential cookies from a security standpoint will be needed, like for a session management, etc. Right? So you won't be able to maintain that session for a certain period of time without those. So we've, as I said at the beginning, right? So we've have no trackers, we have no permissions, etc. So it's not going to be really a deal breaker for us. But if the law requires us to bring the consent manager screen first and the cookies later, we'll have to plan. So we are still discussing and debating this internally. So I don't have a right answer here.
Ankit bhai?
And yeah, I completely chime in with Shravan. There are two types of essential cookies, right? One that is for your benefit of your business, and second is one which is for the benefit of the data subject. So again, if you apply that purpose lens and clearly write down this cookie does this. For example, there are cookies which are required for session management. It is not for Zerodha's business to grow or Digio's business to grow. It is for the user's benefit. Classify that as an essential cookie and move on. I mean, whenever in doubt, apply the first principles. That's
Okay.
been our stance on things.
Perfect. So that's why finally we have an absolute disagreement with both of you. In our view, the law does not allow you to distinguish between essential and non-essential cookies. That's not there in the law, right?
Correct.
Secondly, there is no way modern digital commerce can work without essential cookies before consent. I know, Shravan, you want to comply with the law. I don't think it will be possible for you to comply with the law in letter and in spirit. Some cookies, some data you'll have to collect before you take consent for cybersecurity purposes, for all of that, right? That is not baked into the law. And secondly, I can tell you, I know you've been a very responsible actor throughout. None of your competitors are going to not collect data from cookies before they take consent. Guaranteed. We work with many of them, right? Therefore, I think the argument has to be that people will have to take a practical call along what Sanket said as a model. Cookies that are essential for cybersecurity, website integrity, and for protection of the data subject's own information. For age gating, all of that, we will have to take without consent, and we will have to go to the board and say, this was an oversight in the law. This is our well-intentioned way of solving this problem. This is the only way it can work. Anything else will impose us, our website, and the data subject to greater risks, which can't be our intention. It is under law what is called the mischief rule. Technically not applicable, but what is the mischief that the law is trying to solve? Trying to make everything more secure and responsible. You can't have silly rules which make it more insecure and messes with people. So along the same line, but I think I'm very excited. we will see this going to the board in the next 3 years. So as a geeky lawyer, I'm very excited to see what a responsible board will say in reaction to this, right? But cookies, takeaway for everyone, hot takes. There's a problem. You all need to come up with a bespoke way to solve it in a responsible manner. That, like Sanket says, keeps the first principles of the law in mind.
Have high fiber, low sugar cookies. Sugar diabetic, no problematic cookies.
Okay, so we have 6 minutes. Last question. What do you think the regulators will do to the regulated entities on respect of DPDP? Are we expecting a DPDP audit from the RBI, SEBI, the RDI? Do you think they will audit the fintech unregulated entities? Are we going to finally see the RBI say, I want the digital lenders to be audited by me? They have the power to do it. Will we see that? What do the two of you think? Because you're two of the smartest people in this business who are looking very closely at tech with a regulatory overhang. Everybody else who's looking at tech in other industries, they don't have a regulator so sharply overseeing everything. What do you think the regulator will do?
So
Shravan.
I'll go first. So, I'm not sure whether like a DP audit will happen. So because we've all already been at least for regulated entities, right? So there have been, like Sanket said, monthly ones audit for them. I've been sitting in audits every day almost throughout the year. So the number of audits that we go through are humongous. So another audit, I don't think makes any sort of sense. But the current rules say that the data protection audit will happen for a significant fiduciary, right? So if we are defined as a significant data fiduciary, we will have to undergo that. But for a non-significant data fiduciary, I think the government will be happy with the like the regulatory audits and not really go for a complete audit on their own.
But do you
Yeah.
think SEBI will apply a data protection or data privacy audit as a separate?
So let me
I
clarify.
think they'll
Not
bake it into the CSCRF framework and not really have another audit altogether.
So you think the CSCRF audit will have another part to it,
Yeah,
another
another.
section which will deal with TP.
Yeah.
So it's coming.
Yeah.
And Sanket, what do you think? Do you think any chance that they will, because the RBI can, any chance that they will pick up downstream partners of regulated entities? And they've done it, by the way, to one of our clients on another context. Will they pick up downstream regulated entities and audit them?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It has already started happening.
Yes.
It has started happening in pockets. So it again depends on the nature of business. For example, especially when it is lending, multiple layers to it, right? There is a regulated entity, there is a digital lending service provider, digital lending app. There are lead generation platforms, a lot of things, right? It is going to happen in lending, and RBI will look at the popular ones and the practices, because that's where the largest footprint of data is.
Correct.
And B, they will also put in the onus of compliance, as it should be, on the regulated entity. It has already
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. We should see where that goes. On that note, should we take a few questions? I think we have 3 minutes left, so probably not enough time to uh, do all the questions. But let me quickly go through it. So nobody's mentioned who this question is for, so I'll generally lay it out. Section 7A, exemptions from taking consent. Voluntarily provided data. If someone is downloading the Zerodha app and setting up an account with Zerodha and voluntarily providing their mobile number, is this voluntarily provided data? And what is then not voluntarily provided? Shravan, do you want to take it and then I can take it, or do you want me to take it and then you can respond?
I think you can take this.
Okay. So the chances are, depending on how the Zerodha app is structured, the phone number would be voluntarily provided data. You don't need to take consent on that.
That's the first step.
Everything, yeah, the first step. Everything else would not fall under voluntarily provided data unless without that data Zerodha can't provide the service that it provides. Not can't provide the service that it provides well, but can't provide the service at all without that data, right? There is an open question as to whether the ability to reach out to credit bureaus in a lending context is voluntarily provided or not. And we'll zoom out of that for a while. But as far as the Zerodha app is concerned, nothing except the first step should be voluntarily provided, would be my guess. Shravan doesn't give me any work, so I don't know his app well. But Shravan, go on, yeah, your thoughts.
So I think we've take consent at that stage also. So we don't really take that stance of voluntarily provided. So we take it for without consent.
Because even though it is voluntarily provided, there is a purpose for which someone has put in. So before processing that data, I as a user, I am a Zerodha user, I actually put in my mobile number. But before Zerodha processes my mobile number, there is a purpose why they are processing it.
Basically, we've take consent saying that we might have to share this with a cloud telephony provider, etc. So consents are taken for the mobile number as well.
Correct. So team FCC, do we have 5 extra minutes? Because there's a lot of very interesting questions. Or should we just shut
Yes,
shop
I
now?
think if it's okay with the speakers, it's okay with us. It'd be
Shravan,
nice
Sanket,
to
5 minutes?
close on it.
Okay,
No problem.
perfect. So quick question, one question, and I think I'll take this one. There has been a constitutional bench hearing on the validity of the DPDPA. Uh, if the act becomes invalid, what will be the effect on the industry? Guys, guaranteed, I look at this daily 20 times. This is not a constitutionally invalid act. And in fact, the constitutional challenges do not argue that the act as a whole is constitutionally invalid. They argue basically that the government exemptions are invalid. So regardless of that, on you, there is no impact. Please do not stop compliance saying there's a constitutional challenge pending. We're going to wait until that is resolved. That's
This is
just not
that
going to
type
work.
of question कि exam बारिश हो जाएगी, exam cancel हो जाएगा.
Correct. Okay. Last question. There's a real tension between reducing onboarding friction and collecting valid layered consent. This is that whole consent fatigue issue. Is there any UX pattern you have seen that actually works without spiking drop-off rates? Anyone?
Any additional screen or action will lead to some drop off. Now, there are two types of users, right? There are serious users and there are casual users. Casual users are all about click, 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 just move on. And then there are serious users, right? Serious users, I mean, if they are serious about data privacy, there could be a different type of drop off. And they're informed users, they're actually the informed users. But if they're non-serious users and they're used to click, getting to their end goal with a few clicks, and here the number of clicks and the text increases, there will be some cognitive load and they might drop off.
Right. Shravan, your thoughts?
So again, there is no perfect UX pattern that you can build. Given that the younger generation is more, I can say, impatient. I'm really not sure if we can ever build a perfect UX pattern where you can take consents and also make them happy. There will be drop-offs, as Sanket said, but again, it depends on the intent. If the customer has come with an intent to open the account, he'll definitely open it no matter how many ever consents you put it in his in his path. But if the customer is just come to check your platform, there will be drop offs at that stages.
Right. So, and just to, I mean, kind of point, and I have nothing to add obviously to this, but just to kind of point you in the direction of a matter that I was involved with in shamelessly plugging a client. Look at HDFC's new PayZap app, right? I think they've done a good job. They obviously, everyone can have their views on whether it's perfect, but from where they were to where they are now, and prior to implementation of DPDP, I think it's a great first step. We're right now designing a few consent fatigue reduction solutions in the online digital space. The ideal way to do this is to break it down and say, in the first stage, I will only collect the first set of consents that I need. Then when someone clicks on a fresh product, I will collect the consents that I need. And then the next product I will collect, and or sometimes I'll wait for a month before I collect some of these products. Once they are enmeshed in my system, they love me, then TK, they'll spend an additional 2 minutes giving me consent. So just like all these FMCG companies structure dark patterns to make you buy one more chocolate, one more cookie, all of that, you need to do a little bit of scheming, and I wouldn't call it dark patterns, a little bit of scheming on how is it that a customer can be politely persuaded to give me consent for legitimate reasons and purposes, obviously, in a manner that is better for me and the customer. If we try and put that full front of consent in the initial bit, or even if we aim that in the first 1 month, we will collect all the consent we need, drop-offs will be higher. So break it up, small packets. Let's take the FMCG example. Remember how the cookie biscuit packets became smaller and smaller and drove sales higher and higher? Our consent packages also need to get smaller and smaller so that the number of people who are going to give you consent without getting irritated are higher and higher. Right? And obviously visual medium, Yevo, layered, all of that stuff, all the good stuff inside. But my concluding line here is, if you engage with this as a responsible actor without seeing it just as a pain, like Digio and Zerodha clearly have, then you will be able to solve 99% of the problems that this law brings up. Cookies will solve next, right? But on that note, again, FCC has given you an email ID. You can write into them if you want a video recording, if you want to have a further chat. Do let FCC know, and I'm sure they'll organize more webinars on this topic. But thank you for staying back. I hope this was really useful to you. And thank you, Shravan and Sanket. I know that in the middle of a busy working day, both of you have taken your time to share your thoughts with us. I am fairly confident that the audience would have found this useful, at least more useful than the lawyerly nonsense we usually do. So thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
Matthew.
much for having me
Thanks,
here.
Shravan.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much. Thank you, Sanket. Thank you, Shravan. And thank you, Matthew, for a great and engaging session. We've had great participation, great feedback, and everyone wants a recording of the session. That's always nice to hear. Thank you, everyone, for attending and taking out time to listen to the insights offered by our speakers. And please keep in touch with the FinTech Convergence Council for more such initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.